Okay, where's everybody else? Gone. Which Shay is here. I saw Shay. Here? Gabby's here waiting for Shay. That is not unlike Shay. Gray Russ, Cahill, Campbell, Bowman, Hardy, Baybrook, Livingston, Bucky, Morgan, O'Brien, Pickering, Urban, Winfield, Ted Hutt, Six.
All right. So, what'd you think about this this story? A good man is hard to find. Let's just start with your general assessments first. Go ahead, Cameron.
If we wanted to tie this in with religious ideology, there's a bunch of cases where you can tie in on the grandmother who doesn't fall under the same commandments or like religious sins and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an obvious connection here. What I wanted to warn you about is that, I mean, this isn't really an issue about a particular religious denomination. And we all know that Flannery O'Connor is Catholic. And I mean, what she's writing about here, I think, can be generalized into, without getting too much into religious dogma or trying to figure out just what one religion says about good and evil. I think what we can do is just kind of generalize the concepts about good and evil, right? I mean, I think we can pretty much look at these two characters, and determine that they are, you can use the word sinful or you can use the word evil. I don't care which one you use. What I'm warning you against is trying to associate it with one religious denomination or perspective. And the only reason for that is that, different religious perspectives are out there. So just because, she doesn't fit in with one religious perspective doesn't mean that she might not fit in with another. So, yeah, I think you're exactly right that it's obvious that she's, the grandmother has, characteristics. You can talk about all the faults in her character and all of those things without really taking it back to a specific religious perspective, okay? So let's just kind of try to keep it neutral in the sense that, you know, she's got good qualities and she's got bad qualities, and essentially the bad qualities make her, you know, an untrustworthy and what I would say is a sinful person. And I look at the misfit and I say the same thing. He's got good qualities, he's got bad qualities, but ultimately, you know, he's a sinful person as well. And I think that's, you know, O'Connor's message in here, you know, especially like if, and I, you know, want to, you know, just make sure we're focused on the story here, you know, is that after, like, when she first meets the misfit, and I want to get to this, I'm going to just bring up the computer just so, you know, you guys can see the screen, what I'm looking at. On the page at the beginning where it says, you know, look here now, you know, began suddenly, right? This is that part of the story where they've had the accident and the misfit comes and talks to them, and it's the grandmother shrieks and she scrambles to her feet and stood staring, and she's like, "You're the misfit. I recognized you at once." Right? And I think that's a really interesting comment right there that O'Connor makes, because, you know, she recognizes the misfit. She doesn't have a picture of the misfit or anything, but what O'Connor seems to be saying here is that, you know, the grandmother's the one that recognizes him because they're the same, right? When she says, "I recognized you," in other words, she's recognizing herself in him. She's seeing him as herself. So that is really a, you know, a pivotal point in the story. And I'm just going to bring back the camera here. It's a pivotal point in the story where we can start to now focus on the fact that the grandmother and the misfit are the same. Now we can start to argue about which one is worse. And let's look at the evidence. So let's hear some of your arguments about the misfit, right? So tell me, I mean, the obvious reasoning for claiming that the misfit is a worse person is that he's a callous murderer, right? He doesn't seem to have any remorse for anything that he does. I mean, he just kills people and he doesn't care. He steals, he burns their house down, he does whatever he wants to do because he doesn't care. But what are the redeeming factors in this character, right? What are the things that would make him somewhat good in your eyes? In other words, if you're going to argue that the misfit or the grandmother is a worse person than the misfit, right, you're going to have to hold the misfit up as being a fairly, you know, good human being here. I mean, even though he's a murderer. So what are some of the characteristics? What are some of the pieces of evidence from the story that would demonstrate that? I'm having trouble seeing everybody in the camera here because the camera keeps going in and out. But you know, just feel free to, you know, chime in here. What are some of the things in the story that would make the misfit kind of a good person? Yeah, go ahead. Is that Shay down there?
Yes, he's pretty much just giving us who he is and not trying to play nice. He's just giving us who he is and being very honest, straight, and direct.
All right. So whereabouts in the story does that come out? I mean, and let's go to the, you know, to that part of the story. Whereabouts is that? I mean, I want you to show me some of the evidence here, because, you know, I've got some things to say, but man, you know, if you are seeing something, I want to hear what you have to say. Anybody know whereabouts what she's looking at? At what point in time do we know that the misfit is just not playing games and just tells people who he is and lives by that code? Go ahead, Cameron.
Here I'm having trouble. Here she says, in the story, grandmother says, "I just know you're a good man. You're not a fake comic." And he says, "No, I am a good man." Yeah. So
that's. I've got this highlighted in green right here. Right? He says, you know, "I'm not a good man," but then he says, "I ain't the worst in the world neither." Right? And you got to appreciate his assessment of himself here. And then he goes on and he talks about these kind of mitigating circumstances. And when I say mitigating circumstances, I mean, these are things that, you know, he's lived a life that has pretty much led him here. I mean, what were some of the events that occurred in his life that forced him to be this callous murderer? Do you remember any of those things that happened?
Yeah, his dad died of like a flu. He never had anything like really to do with it.
Yep.
Most of like he he just didn't really like know where to go from there.
Yeah, and he ended up in a penitentiary, right? And so he's in prison, and he's look, his time in the prison was not rehabilitative in any way, right? I mean, if you look down here, it says turn to the right, it was a wall. Turn to the left, it was a wall. Look up at the ceiling, look down, it was the floor. He said, in prison, he goes, I forgot what I did. He's just like, and he makes this speech at the end where he just says, I don't even really know why I was punished. I just know that, he says down here, he said, after he's talking to her, he said, I found that the crime don't matter. He said, you can do one thing or another, kill a man, take a tire off his car, because sooner or later you're going to forget what it was you've done and just be punished for it. And so what he finds is that I think what he's doing here is he's just looking and just saying, man, life has just been unfair to me. I've had this, it doesn't matter what I do, I ended up being punished. I ended up being thrown in jail. People are after me. And he says, that's why I call myself the misfit, right? Because he just doesn't feel like he fits in. So you can understand, right, that this guy, has, maybe a product of the society that he's living in. That may be something that, that you want to bring up if you're going to try to make this guy, to be a better character than just a murderer. And I think that, look, we tend to think that, murder is, pretty high up on the list of bad things to do in our lives, right? But what O'Connor seems to be doing is O'Connor seems to think that the grandmother and the misfit are pretty much the same. So when we get here to the end of the story and the grandmother, gets shot and the misfit talks about her, being a good woman, if somebody was there to shoot her every minute of her life, we kind of have to look at this situation and say, all right, so does the grandmother learn anything, right? I mean, the misfit doesn't change. He's just a calloused, cold killer. That's it. Does the grandmother change at the end? That's what I want to know, because if the grandmother changes, if she becomes someone better at the end, then I think we can ultimately argue that, she's the better person. She can be redeemed, so to speak. Where, I know the misfit's not going to be redeemed. There's nothing that's going on in this conversation that's going to change him, right? He's admitting, he's like, I don't want any help, right? He's like, the grandmother tells him, you should pray, and she goes through that whole thing, and he says, he's like, I don't want to pray. I don't want any help. He said, I'm doing just fine like I am. So I guess we should probably go and talk about the grandmother now, and then what we can use, how we use the grandmother in the event. And look, the events for the grandmother, are in terms of volume much larger than the events that we've got for the misfit. All right, we just see the misfit being, that short conversation. But we can go all the way back to the beginning of the story to talk about the grandmother. And I think that, this kind of works in reverse. And this is why Flannery O'Connor is probably one of America's greatest storytellers, right? Because she kind of shows us very little about the misfit, but we're able to make kind of judgments about him. We see a lot about the grandmother, but our judgments seem to be tempered about her. And that's something that I think she's playing on, is our kind of judgmental attitudes, and how we decide who's good and who's evil in this world. And I know these are kind of things that you guys have been discussing in other classes, and this is kind of stuff that like, how do we determine what's right and what's wrong? How do we determine who's good and who's bad? And a lot of times we do that by simply making quick irrational judgments. So it's pretty obvious here that O'Connor wants us to see the grandmother as a grandmotherly type, a figure who is, warm, welcoming. She makes chocolate chip cookies. She takes care of the grandkids. She's a fun person to be around. Everybody likes her, that kind of thing, right? That's what a grandmother naturally is. And O'Connor is playing on that. It's a reason why she calls her the grandmother and she doesn't give her a name. She wants to see you as she wants you to see her as a type. So now that we know what the expectation is of a grandmother, now we have to turn around and find out, all right, if we know what the expectation is of a murderer, we looked at the evidence for what could possibly cause him to be good. So now if we look at the grandmother as being naturally good. What are the things that she's doing that make her bad? Now we need to start building some evidence about what makes her a despicable character, or what makes her sinful, or what makes her just as bad as a murderer. All right, who's got their hand up down here?
In the very beginning of the story, after it talks about how she doesn't want to go to Florida, it seems like she's keeps making an excuse. Well, it seems like the only reason why she brought up the misfit was like for her own selfish need to like try and convince, I guess, her son to take them to Florida instead. And that seems to be the only reason why she decided to be like
Yep, I think that's a pretty. I mean, we're talking the second paragraph of the story, right? First page, and we're looking at this argument here that she's saying about, I wouldn't go to Florida because there's a criminal like, the misfit in there, how, foreshadowing here, no kidding. It's kind of, fortuitous that they end up meeting the misfit because, this becomes the crux of the story. But ultimately, what I want you to see here is this paragraph below that, right? Where she starts now, like, she doesn't want to go to Florida because she's afraid of the misfit. But look what she uses as justification here. And this is why I want you to start digging into this grandmother's character, because you're going to find that once you start building evidence for her being, kind of this despicable character, you're going to see that, maybe she does equate to being the same as a murderer. So she says here, it's that the children have been to Florida before. And it says, you all ought to take them somewhere else for a change so they would see different parts of the world and be broad. They've never been to East Tennessee. So listen to what she's saying there. It's almost like if you go to East Tennessee, you're somehow going to be broadened culturally. I don't know if any of you have ever been to East Tennessee, and I know I sound like the grandmother here in judging this, right? But, that's where Dolly World is, right? I mean, I don't look at that as being kind of the bastion of, cultural development. So here she is kind of, raining on Florida as if it's some kind of wasteland, and she's holding up a place like East Tennessee as if it's the the best place in the world to be cultured. All right, Doug, is that you with your hand up down there in the corner?
Yeah, I was what you call it? I was gonna ask, or not ask, mention. She uses the phrase "little Negro."
Yeah.
In the story.
Oh, that's like the rated G version of this woman, right? I mean, look at, do you find her racist commentary throughout the story? Right? I mean, a lot of people are going to write this off and say, oh, well, that's just a sign of the times or something. So, yeah, let's take a look at that. I mean, she makes some unbelievable comments in here. I mean, but when you got these two little ratty characters, like, look at these kids, right? I mean, they're so disrespectful. Right, she looks good compared to them. Right, she's over there trying to tell them what to do, and this is a problem. So let's kind of go through that. Right, I mean, that June Star. I mean, what a character she is. Right, she wouldn't stay home with $1 million. Right, she's afraid she'd miss something. I mean, he's got these sassy commentary in here, but this is I think one of the things that if I'm in that next page, right after this conversation where she tries to talk about going to Florida. On the second page, the paragraph begins, the old lady settled herself comfortably, right? So now she gets in the car, and this is key, right? I mean, I'm bringing this up for a reason, right? Where they're describing her, she's wearing white cotton gloves, which, she's got her purse and those kind of things. And yes, back in that time period when people traveled, they dressed up. Right, but look at the reason why she does it, and there's all sorts of symbolism in here as well, right? Like the things like violets, the blue dress, and all those kind of things. Often those are associated with things that people are buried in, wearing the white gloves and that kind of stuff. So O'Connor's kind of foreshadowing through these images, right, that she's going to die, right? And it says in the last line of that paragraph, in case of an accident, anyone seeing her dead on the highway would know at once that she was a lady. And so now this is important because when the misfit talks to her at the end of the story, it's almost like he starts every sentence with, lady, you shouldn't have recognized me. Lady, I wish you wouldn't have said that. Lady, right? And he keeps referring to her as lady. And so we think of that right off the bat is that's just a formality. That's just the way men addressed women at that point in time. But this is what O'Connor is doing, right? It's as if she's trying to establish herself as a lady, And she thinks that if she wears the right clothes, right, that people will think that she's a lady. And what I find is that her character is anything but ladylike, right? So this is why I'm trying to hold up the grandmother as being just as bad as the misfit, right? Because she's worried about wearing the uniform, right? She's worried about wearing the clothes that would make her look like she's the part. She's not worried about who she is. She's worried about kind of dressing up so that other people will think that she's not a despicable character. So this whole thing comes out, Doug, in the next page. This is where you're talking about, right? So I'm on that next page, and it says, let's go through Georgia fast, right? The top of that next page. So here are the kids, right? John Wesley's got this little smart aleck comment, right? Let's go through Georgia fast so we don't have to look at it much. And then the grandmother says, if I were a little boy, I wouldn't talk about my native state that way, right? Like, don't criticize your native state. But then look what she does. She says Tennessee has the mountains and Georgia has the hills. She's criticizing Georgia, right? Here she is holding up Tennessee as if, this is the place where the mountains are, and Georgia's just a bunch of like hillbillies, right? So she, in one sentence, she's criticizing the boy for making derogatory comments about something, and then she makes the derogatory comment next. O'Connor is a master at this. This is called juxtaposition, guys. Juxtaposition. Juxtaposition. That means you take two unlike events and you jam them next to each other to show the difference in those ideas. Right? So what she's doing is she's juxtaposing this conversation. She's juxtaposing characters. She's sticking things next to each other so that we'll see what a despicable character she is. Go ahead, Doug.
Then right after that, she tells the story. It said they passed a large cotton field with 5 or 6 graves, and she says, look at the graveyard. That was the old family burying ground that belonged to the plantation. Like immediately, like, large cotton field plantation, the sign of like that there was slavery in the South. Yep.
And before that, look at this commentary she makes before that. I mean, look, this is great. You're picking up on everything. So every time she says something, she's exposing herself for what she is, right? Here's June Starr, John Wesley says, right here she says, Tennessee has the mountains. And John Wesley says, Tennessee's just a hillbilly dumping ground. Georgia's a lousy state too. And June Starr, of course, agrees with that. And now the grandmother lectures them, right? And she says, in my time, children were more respectful of their native states and their parents and everything else. People did right then. And then all of a sudden, listen to what she says. Oh, look at that cute little pickaninny, right? And she throws out this incredibly racist commentary about some kid that's standing on the side of the road. And June Starr says he didn't have any britches on. And look at her judgmental attitude here. He probably didn't have any. Little niggers in the country don't have things like we do. And I'm thinking to myself, I want to just put my hands around her neck and choke her, because she does not see herself as being the things that she's criticizing her grandchildren for, right? Does everybody see that? This is that juxtapositioning that O'Connor is a master at doing. She's taking something that's trying to be perceived as good and she's making it bad. Do you have Dominique, is that you in the back waving your hand, or are you raising your hand? No?
Yeah. Nope, yeah, he's
Or
taking it all in.
Sorry, I can't see back there. I'm trying the best I can. All right. So it's something to add, Ms. Warrow, before I move on?
No, we had a really good conversation about this text and the supplemental text yesterday. I'm waiting to hear more voices on our end.
Okay, great. So let's hear what else you have to say. What's some other evidence for the grandmother, right? I mean, let's hear some more.
Yeah, look, all of this sounds like extremely hypocritical.
Yep.
But I feel like
on the next page, it mentions she was a native lady courted by a mister, and usually like with that, it means like you're a rich like white lady with money who needs to be escorted by a man everywhere because she's afraid of like other people like throughout her skin color. And then it goes into about the watermelon. She never got the watermelon, she said, because a nigger boy ate it when he saw the initials EATE.
Right. I mean, I'm laughing because O'Connor is just she's softening the blow because it's the grandmother telling the story. So you got this, this little old lady who's supposed to be this good and nurturing character, and she just keeps exposing this awful interior every time she speaks. And I highlight the last part of that too. I mean, when you guys, talking about that event, she even says that she would have married Mr. Teagarden because he bought Coca-Cola stock and he made a lot of money. Like she would marry for money. So, I mean, what an interesting character, right? So, all right. So we're getting it, right? We're getting the fact that she's exposing herself. And we as readers should be picking up on this, even if we don't, right? When she gets shot at the end, then we should. But here's this is the area that I want to spend some time on, because this seems like this neat little side trip that they take when they end up at the Tower restaurant, right? When they meet Red Sam. So key here, right? With the juxtaposition thing, right? I'm at this paragraph underneath those capital letters, try Red Sammy's famous barbecue. Everybody there in that part of the story? Right? Everybody there? All right, so in that paragraph, it says, Red Sammy was laying on the bare ground outside the tower with his head under a truck, while a gray monkey about a foot high, chained to a small chinaberry tree, chattered nearby. All right, you should be thinking to yourself, as soon as you see a character and then an animal, and O'Connor does this throughout the story, right? She associates people with animals like, the hippopotamus and the parrot and all those kind of things, which, we can spend all day talking about those correlations. But this monkey is a really important one, because here's Red Sam, this character who, he's a lot like the grandmother, right? They have this relationship. And, the monkey sees the kids coming, and as soon as he sees them, he jumps, to the top, the highest limb that he can in the tree. It's like the monkey knows that bad things are coming, right? He's going to avoid these people as far as possible. So here comes this great conversation between the grandmother and Red Sam. You tell me what you think is going on, because the key to this, right, is these lines. Because you're a good man, the grandmother said. And then the Red Sam says, a good man is hard to find. You hear the story, the title of the story being hashed out here, right? Bells should be going off in your head, and you should be thinking to yourself, this is probably one of the key parts of the story. So you tell me, why is this a key part of the story? What happens here that makes this so relevant?
Red Sammy mentions two fellows came in here last week driving a Chrysler. What should we call it? Like almost like showing that it could be like the misfit and the other guy he was with.
It probably was the misfit. That's the thing. But what's so significant about that, right? Red Sam says, he's sitting there talking about his, about the world is just not trustworthy anymore, right? And he goes and what does he say here with the beat up cars? Like, two fellers came in here last week driving a Chrysler. It was a beat up old car, but it was a good one. And these boys looked all right to me. Said they worked at the mill, and I let them fellers charge the gas they bought. Now, why did I do that? And the grandmother says, because you're a good man. How does Red Sam know that those people who wanted to charge gas are good men? Yeah, he just looks at them, right? I mean, talk about a superficial judgment of character, right? That's probably the misfit. Yeah, Andrew?
Well, like before that, it says Arthur Shane, but it says that the grandmother like snake. That's like probably.
I didn't hear the last part you said there.
It says, aren't you ashamed to kiss the grandmother? It's like relating her to a snake again.
Yep, there you go. That's certainly association of a snake. And I love that little, conversation there, because, that Red Sam's wife comes over and goes, ain't she cute? And wouldn't you like to be my little girl? And June Star says, no, I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't live in a broken down place like this for $1 million, right? I mean, it's funny. And so, the grandmother just immediately scolds her because she's being impolite. but yet the grandmother is just as impolite, right? So again, we're going back to Cameron, you mentioned the word hypocrisy, right? And she just doesn't understand who she is, right? So Red Sam, he's over here talking about how, a good man he is, but look what he does in the paragraph right after that hist part. When, he came in and tells his wife to quit lounging on the counter and hurry up with these people's orders. And look what a slob he is, right? His guts hanging out like a sack of meal from under his shirt, right? And he's just a slovenly guy. And so here's this guy who's, really no position to be judging people, telling, the grandmother what a good man he is and how he's able to identify goodness by sight. And this is really interesting, right? Because that conversation goes on, right? When they're having the conversation about the rest of the world and how these bad things are happening, and Red Sam says, a good man is hard to find. And isn't that ironic that a Red Sammy would be saying a good man is hard to find because he's not good, and neither is she. So from the perspective of this story, I would think a good man is impossible to find. There is no good man or woman in this story. And I think that's O'Connor's purpose here, right? She's trying to get us to see both of these characters as being equally despicable, but at the same time now we're thinking about, all right, so what does that all mean? So after that event, here we go. This is where I want to come back. This is O'Connor. She's framing this little section of the story, right? You come into the Tower restaurant, Red Sam's laying on the ground. There's a monkey in the tree. At the end of this little section, he and the grandmother are discussing what the world's problems are. And then look at this line right here. The children ran outside into the white sunlight and looked at the monkey in the lacy chinaberry tree. He was busy catching fleas on himself and biting each one carefully between his teeth as if it were a delicacy. What is going on with that? What is the monkey representing here in the context of this short kind of interlude in the story?
Someone who's like poor and like the simplest things, like a treasure almost. Like when a homeless person's rummaging through like garbage can looking for food, it's like the monkey is eating fleas, like not like leftovers, but like kind of like scraps in a way.
All right, and so what if we look at that monkey? When the monkey sees the kids get out of the car, he runs to the top of the tree, right? He recognizes that bad things are coming. So in this situation right here, we just got done talking about how Red Sam and grandmother are sitting there talking about how bad the world is, and they're pointing the fingers at everybody else in the world except them, right? They're talking about how Europe is to blame. They're talking about how bad people are in the world. You can't leave your house without locking your doors anymore, right? They're going through this whole thing of blaming everybody for their problems. And what does the monkey do? The monkey's sitting there taking care of himself, right? That's the key. The monkey is not blaming anybody else for his problem. Here's this monkey, right, who seems to be more trustworthy as a human than Red Sam and grandmother, right? So O'Connor, in her wisdom here, right, she's so good at doing this, she's juxtaposing the grandmother and Red Sam with this monkey. She's showing how they're pointing the finger. They're the ones telling everybody else that they're the problem. The monkey is sitting in the tree just taking care of himself, right? That monkey is not trying to blame anybody for his problems. So that's a pretty interesting correlation, right? When you see that story right in the middle of a story, you start seeing something framed like that. You see a monkey and a monkey at the front and at the beginning and the end. Block off that section of the story and start reading that for its own value. All right. So interesting that they're outside of Tombsboro, right? Tombsboro, nice little play on words there. It's going to be the place where they die. Yeah, grandmother talks about this house and all that, right? And it gets them to go down there looking for this house. And then they have the accident. All right. So now the conversation begins. She lied to get them there. She ends up getting them all killed, right? And we see all this imagery here of death, like the hearse and all that other stuff. So good. The conversation begins with the misfit here, I hope you can get this, right after you see the lines, we've had an accident, where accident is in capital letters, right? The misfit and his gang are out, and he starts in with the conversation. There it is, lady, the man said to the children's mother, would you mind calling the children to sit by you, because children make me nervous, right? So here the interaction between the grandmother and the misfit begin, and I want you to just highlight that, and that's right where that recognition of her, when she sees him, and he says, you shouldn't have recognized me, lady, because now bad things are gonna happen. So when we get past that section right there, you need to start paying attention to this conversation, because look what she says. We're just finished that conversation about grandmother and Red Sam, talking about how they identify good people, right? They just by sight. If someone comes in and wants to, charge something, Red Sam says, I thought those fellers looked all right to me. So the grandmother, right? We know that she's not a lady, but yet he calls her a lady, and she's going to try and play this lady card in order to make herself, somewhat better than everybody else, when she says, you wouldn't shoot a lady, would you? Right? And here she is trying, obviously this is a move for self-preservation, but this is next line after that, right? The misfit says, I wouldn't want to have to do that. And then the grandmother says, listen, I know you're a good man. You don't look a bit like you have common blood. I know you must come from nice people, right? In that right there, takes her right into the living room of Red Sam, right? She and Red Sam are exactly the same. They're the despicable characters. They're the ones who think that they can judge people and identify goodness by sight. And she continues that, right? And she keeps going on, I can just look at you and tell, I know you're a good man. And she's doing, and a lot of people are going to look at that and say, well, she's just pleading for her life. She's trying to figure out a way to save herself. Yeah, she is. But O'Connor's not, O'Connor's smart enough to say, this has meaning, right? And the meaning is that she's really exposing who she is. All right. So as that conversation's going on, I want you to also see this, because this factor right here at the bottom of that paragraph, it says, yes, ma'am, the finest people in the world. Are you at that paragraph? All right. At the bottom of that paragraph, right, the misfit says, watch them children, Bobby Lee, right? He's giving them instructions. And then he says, they were huddled together. He couldn't think of anything to say. And he says, ain't a cloud in the sky, he remarked, looking up at it. Don't see no sun, but don't see no cloud neither. How could that be possible? If there's a cloudless sky, he doesn't see the sun, but he doesn't see the clouds. And it's not night, so don't try that one, right? What could possibly be going on here? How could there possibly be no sun, but no cloud? I bring this up because, man, you're going to see it a bunch more times before the end of this story, right? Talking about the cloudless sky, right? He says it over and over again. O'Connor keeps bringing it up over and over again throughout the last parts of this conversation. It's when the grandmother meets the misfit, and when she's talking about, I know I can, I know you wouldn't shoot a lady. I know you come from, good people. That's when O'Connor brings up the fact that there's a cloudless sky, no sun, but no cloud. Go ahead, Cameron.
Could it just be like symbolism? Like the sun could be like you hit somebody, and then like the absence of clouds is like everything you use to cover up what's in somebody's rock. You still can't find like
could be. That's perfectly acceptable. I think that's a good idea. Anybody else got any ideas about what this means? Any?
Yeah, it could be, at least they do want to look at the religious viewpoint, but it could be another biblical reference. Because what you call it, when Jesus had him die on the cross, there's no the one that was that nobody seen before, where there's no there's no like, clouds or whatever, and there was no, it just became dark.
Judgment Day, right? Yeah, could be. Look, I have no explanation for this. I'm not trying to tell you that I have the answer. I'm just trying to tell you that O'Connor seems to be, offering this image, right? The cloudless sky, the image of the cloudless sky as a mark that something really important is going to happen here. And, whether you look at it as like Cameron does, is looking as a way of exposing or, shining on people or not shining on people, who they are, or whether you're looking at it as this is kind of Judgment Day, right? You need to bring this up in your conversation. I mean, this is a piece of evidence that needs to be brought forth, because without it, right, we don't really know what this whole conversation is going to mean here at the end. And we need to get to that end, right? Because, as she keeps saying, you're a good man, like you guys said, he's like, no, I'm not a good man. But we get to that end, right? And the grandmother starts to now, she's reaching for every possible angle she can to try and save herself. And this is really despicable too, right? And the fact that she doesn't try to save Bailey. She doesn't try to save the mother, the children, or anything else, right? She's just worried about saving herself, right? She's like, you wouldn't shoot a lady, would you? Right? Meanwhile, the misfit and his guys are dragging these kids off into the forest and shooting them, right? And she's just sitting there pleading for her own life, right? The pistol shots, and then the grandmother, stops and says, "Did you ever pray?" And again, yeah, we're looking at this from the religious perspective, right? And he's just like, nope. And then they keep shooting people, and she's just sitting there going, "Pray, pray." The grandmother began, "Pray, pray." And look at that. At this point, right, the grandmother knows she's going to die. You can see her starting to unravel. And so at this point, it sounds like she's commanding someone to pray, which it seems like she's telling the misfit that he should pray. But ultimately, it could be interpreted that she's trying to get herself to pray. And that may be a most telling element of the story, because at a point in time when she really needs to pray for herself, she's not doing it, right? She's not starting to pray. She's telling him, you need to pray for yourself, right? She still hasn't learned. He's telling her, you're going to die, lady. This is inevitable. And she's just telling him, you should pray. And in actuality, right, I mean, he's probably telling her, you probably need to pray for yourself. And then, she keeps going on. If you would pray, Jesus would help you. And then, she said, well, why don't you pray? And he goes, I don't want any help. In other words, don't pray for me. You need to be praying for yourself. You want to redeem yourself? This is the time you need to do it. So by the time we get down here at the end, I think this is probably the most pivotal part of the story before he shoots her. And that is that the paragraph begins alone with the misfit, right? I need you to highlight this paragraph for me, and you guys are going to know it. The grandmother found that she had lost her voice. Now here it goes again. There was not a cloud in the sky nor any sun. So she's repeating the image. There was nothing around her but woods. She wanted to tell him that he must pray. She opened and closed her mouth several times before anything came out. Finally, she found herself saying, Jesus, Jesus, meaning Jesus will help you. But the way she was saying it, it sounded as if she might be cursing. So here's a person who is supposed to be this religious figure, right? She's supposed to have faith. She's supposed to be a person who's telling other people how to live their lives, right? And what is she doing? She can't rely on her religion here at the most crucial point in her life. She can't rely on her faith because she doesn't have any, right? She's just a person who likes to tell people that she's got faith. She likes to tell people that she's a religious person. She likes to tell other people that they should be religious. But when it comes time for her to rely on her religion, she can't do it. And what does O'Connor say? It sounds like she's cursing. She can't even understand herself at all. So that paragraph, I think, is probably one of the most critical paragraphs that you can bring up, because it really exposes her for what she is. She just doesn't know herself. At least the misfit knows himself. So the question now, right, she's desperate, right, and she's trying to bribe him here at the end. I want to get the end, right? So the question becomes, right, one more thing about her religion, by the way, right? After the misfit tells her that Jesus shouldn't have raised the dead, right? The grandmother says, well, maybe he didn't raise the dead, right? She has lost all of her faith. She's lost all of her understanding of herself. And so now comes the point where we have to make a determination, right? What happens here at the end, he looks into her face and the grandmother's head cleared for an instant. Are you with me on this paragraph, right? So here, a moment of clarity. She's starting to see things for what they really are. She saw the man's face twisted close to her own as if he were going to cry, and she murmured, "Why, you're one of my babies, you're one of my own children." What on earth does that mean? Does she learn anything? I guess that's my point. Does she figure out who she is here at this point?
I mean, it may seem like it, but I still don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So without seeing her character after she has this realization, we can't know anything about her. Unfortunately, the misfit shoots her, she's dead, and that's just it. So she's laying there in the ditch, and I think this is kind of funny, right? That she's laying there in the ditch looking up at the cloudless sky, with a face like a child, and she's smiling. So a lot of people are going to look at this and say, okay, she learned who she was. She learned her lesson. She was redeemed. She's the better person. Other people, Cameron, I'm just, want to support you on this, might look at this and say, you know what? She still hasn't done anything. Andrew, go ahead.
I just think like maybe there was a moment because when someone has a child, it's their traits and you use your own traits are within the child. So I think that she sees the bad of who she was inside the misfit. And that's what she says.
Oh.
It's like she sees herself.
Like a reflection.
Yeah, interesting. All right. Well, look, these are all great ideas.
Jake, real quick.
I would like to try to control the character by renaming him, calling him a baby and things like that.
I'm sorry, there's too much rustling going on. I couldn't hear you.
He's saying that the grandmother's trying to take control over the situation and the misfit by renaming him. Because when you name someone, give them a name, it's a control situation.
Yeah. All right, look, all of these ideas are really significant, and I encourage you, right, if you're going to write about this, you've got a lot of information you got to manage here, all right? So we'll talk about the Young Goodman Brown story on Friday, and then next week we'll start having more detailed conversations about how to pull all this together. See you guys.
Thank you guys for the presentation. Thank you, Dr. Terry. It was a pleasure. Again, we will see you on Friday.
All righty.